Welcome to the Parallel Entrepreneur, where we dive into the minds of entrepreneurs who push beyond the limits of a single business. Learn how these visionaries invite creative synergies to flow between multiple and oftentimes diverse enterprises simultaneously. Whether you're just starting out or managing multiple ventures, you already think outside the box. And this podcast will inspire you to recognize and tap into the power of parallel entrepreneurship. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Parallel Entrepreneur. I'm your host, Mark Cleveland, and today I'm thrilled to introduce someone who's spent his entire career connecting people with innovators and inspiring entrepreneurial journeys. Francisco Gonzalez is the founder and CEO of Fearless Journeys, a dynamic community for aspiring and ascending entrepreneurs. He's also the host of the Agents of Innovation podcast, where he shared over 130 captivating conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists since 2015. Francisco is also the author of The Heart of the American Dream, which is the sequel to his insightful book, The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste. As executive director of the Economic Club of Miami and a visiting professor at Universidad Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala, Francisco teaches courses on entrepreneurship and innovation while also mentoring the next generation of change makers. Francisco, I'm thrilled to have you here today.
Mark, thank you for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. I remember when you were once on my podcast.
I do too. It felt like yesterday and yet so long ago. What episode number was that?
I believe it was episode 31 of the Agents of Innovation podcast. So people can go back. Gosh, I think it was 6-7 years ago now. But it's funny because we talked a lot about you being a parallel entrepreneur. And in fact, in my first book, you're also the subject of chapter 35. That is the book, The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste. And I titled the chapter, Mark Cleveland, a parallel entrepreneur in unparalleled times. And all of a sudden, now you have a podcast called The Parallel Entrepreneur. So everything just fits so well.
It is so true. The seeds that get planted in our lives and spring later into fruit. Man, I'm grateful for that experience.
I also have you as a featured innovator in my Fearless Journeys community now. I know you've come on some of the live sessions we've done, and we've connected each other, both of us, with a lot of different people.
It's a lifelong relationship mindset that does not express itself in transactions. It expresses itself in love. I guess my first question for you is, what's the very first entrepreneurial thing that you ever did?
My high school best friend, Sean Gross, and I, we grew up in Broward County, Florida, and he had an idea for us to start an auto detailing business. Both of us were involved in sports. I played competitive junior tennis. He played competitive golf. I worked at a tennis pro shop on the weekend, taught tennis to little kids in the summer. He was working at Champ Sports in the mall. And on top of that, we said, let's start something else. This will pay for our concerts and baseball games that we wanted to go to and things like that. So it was fun. And yeah, we ended up having about 200 customers over about a year and a half, some repeat customers too. And it was very easy to go solicit people when you're 17 years old and ask them if they need a car detail.
There is almost always an extremely early emergence of your entrepreneurial spirit. And in your case, it's high school. And then that continues. Most recently, I'm wanting you to tell the story of what inspired you to start Fearless Journeys as a community and a business.
Yeah, Mark, from the time I graduated with my master's degree in history at the University of Maryland for the next 16 years, I worked at 3 different organizations. All 3 were nonprofit organizations focused on public policy, and I primarily was in charge of doing the development fundraising operations for those organizations. And it's very much like business development in a for-profit organization that translates to a nonprofit, and you're dealing with donors that could be considered customers, but you're building relationships. And I always feel like every relationship for me, even though I may be trying to solicit a donation from someone, I always just viewed it as a very authentic, like we're on the same team. I'm just employed by the nonprofit organization. The donor is just as much a part of the team because they're the one funding it, and they're coming to the activities and the events and things like that. So you get to know these people. And I have so many friends today from that first organization. And yet I went on to work for the next organization for 9 years. And then another one for 4 years. One of the things I started noticing is I visited with a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs, and I just would walk away from learning all these stories of people. Because first of all, if you're good at sales or fundraising, you want to get to know your customer, right? And so I would really ask a lot of questions. And I have a very curious mindset when it comes to other people. Like, how did you get from here to there? And when I was meeting somebody who might be a potential donor or was already a supporter of the organization, I probably was meeting them at their point of success, right? Like they've already done something notable. And yet when you meet with them and you start going back, what were they doing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Their trajectory was not as smooth and straight as you might imagine, the journey of a business owner, entrepreneur. So there was just so many ups and downs and even failures that they had. And every time I would walk away from one of these conversations, I would say, gosh, I wish more people could hear that person's story. And after I probably said that to myself 20 or 30 times, after leaving a meeting, I was in the car and I was turning on a podcast. And a little light bulb went off in my head, and I thought maybe I could have a podcast and allow these people to tell their stories. Well, I started that podcast in 2015, and 9 years later, I've had 151 episodes. 2020 happened, and I was getting close to 100 episodes. I was thinking at the time, maybe I should do something to commemorate 100 episodes. And I had actually been putting blog posts up on every episode as well. So one of the first things that came to mind was maybe I could write a book. And that was one of the things that led me then to saying, wouldn't it be cool if I could connect all these entrepreneurs like Mark Cleveland? In fact, I've had a lot of musicians on too. And I introduced you actually in 2020 to a few of the musicians in Nashville.
It was, we all sat down together and talked about the entrepreneurial journey in Music City from the creative class. I was like the entrepreneur in the room who couldn't play piano well, and they were all super creative people. That was a lot of fun.
That exercise we did was like the beginning of what Fearless Journeys became, to say, what if I could connect these other entrepreneurs with each other? And in addition to that, people who are listeners to the podcast, in addition to just listening, I said, what if I start a community where the listeners or anybody else that just happens to come along could connect with some of these great innovators I've had on the podcast, and they could all be connecting with each other and really learning from each other. So that's what we started. What we set out to do was say, okay, we're going to continue the podcast, but we'll have these online live leadership sessions every month where we'll have one of the innovators come on and lead a session on some area of expertise they already have. And I'm lucky that something like 55 of my previous podcast guests have elected to become a featured innovator in the Fearless Journeys community. So very thankful you're one of them as well. And then also we do a book club. Sometimes they're very focused on entrepreneurship. Sometimes it's just self-growth type books, mindset type things that really prepare you to be an entrepreneur. Oftentimes we'll bring the author on one of the live sessions so the community has an opportunity to interact with the author. And if we don't get the author, we'll get somebody either close to the author or somebody very familiar with the book that we're studying to do it. In addition, the fun thing, maybe the number one fun thing we do in Fearless Journeys is we have these great group trips, and we do somewhere between 3 to 5 trips a year now. We've gone to places like Guatemala, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia. We came to Nashville, and we're actually planning some great group trips back to Guatemala, Dominican Republic. I've got Norway, Morocco, and the Patagonia on our list for 2025. So it's going to be great, but we don't just travel together. I mean, yes, we're going to go visit some great landmarks, eat some great food, do all the fun things you want to do in Buenos Aires or wherever we go. But we're going to meet with local entrepreneurs that you can sit across the table, get inspired by, visit their places of business. Maybe that place of business is a factory. Maybe it's a coffee farm in Guatemala. We went to a free trade zone in Uruguay. I mean, just some cool things that most people would not be able to do on a travel experience, but for Fearless Journeys.
You bring 15 to 20 people on these trips, and they have an incredibly memorable experience.
Yeah, it's really great. Yeah, and I think that's what's good. And what's really been really interesting to me is I think that I'm introducing the travelers to the entrepreneurs that we visit, and that's primarily what I'm doing. But what I have found is the people we're visiting, they're so inspired by the people that are traveling with us. They're so happy to connect, and we've seen great connections. We've seen some business connections be made, but also just great advice the couple that we had there in Nashville, they were given, that you introduced us to, we were just blown away by what they were doing, but they also, we were sitting around the table giving them ideas for their business that they had not thought about, and I think they really appreciated that, and totally unexpected. I think the biggest thing to learn is to listen to your customers or even potential customers and get that feedback. What is it about what you're offering that they want? Maybe there's something you're not offering that they want, but they think you can offer it. They believe you can offer it based on something else, and how you might need to shift. I think we become very wedded quickly to what we think works and what we think what we're offering is the thing to offer. But oftentimes, sometimes you got to let some things go and focus on what's actually working.
What do you see the parallel entrepreneur doing differently than a typical entrepreneur?
I think for me, maybe my greatest asset is I'm a great connector of people, but also I'm a great connector of the dots. So I think one of the ways a great connector of people could work is it's not just that, I want Mark Cleveland to meet somebody of interest, but it's that, hey, Mark can bring this to that person. This person can bring this to Mark. Wow, there might be something that might just happen, some magic that might happen if I can connect those two people. I think that's my strong point, and that's where, whether it comes to fearless journeys, I'm really trying to connect people with ideas and particularly with other innovators. And I do that on the sessions. I do that in the trips. I do that on the podcast. I do that through my books. I do that through teaching. So always connecting ideas and people.
Yeah, your superpower is connecting. I've experienced that. Communicating, I've experienced that. And you're working with entrepreneurs who many of them have some of these similar superpowers. So Francisco, let's pivot for a moment and talk about role models and mentors, people who inspired your approach to running multiple businesses, your approach to business in general. It's a workshop that moves around the globe. I just think it's incredibly important to just point people to the Fearless Journeys community. I just can't help but endorse it fully. I'm hoping we'll put links down to this podcast so people can find you easily.
Yeah, people can come to fearlessjourneys.org and start getting a little taste of what it's like. You'll get some of the emails for the book club. Most people tell me I usually will read one or two of the books a year, but the rest of them I'll just follow your weekly summaries, and that gets me caught up with the book.
Yeah, it's like the cheat sheet, Francisco's Cliff Notes. I consume them. I'm wanting to dive into your experience with so many entrepreneurial conversations to just really highlight what is it that you think is working that's making parallel entrepreneurs tick? What are some of the pain points and conversations that you tend to have?
Yeah, it's hard to pick like one or even a couple people, because I would say the kind of people that inspire me are the kind of people I've had on my podcast. Man, you do one podcast, you do 5 podcasts, you do 20, 30, 40. Every time you get off a podcast episode with one of these entrepreneurs, you're like so inspired, you're like want to become an entrepreneur yourself. What was cool is that then I was getting like all this advice from each of them about what to do, what they thought would be great, strengths, weaknesses, all these sorts of things. And it's cool. And I'm still getting that advice. And I also feel like that's a real asset for me that I can, again, like you said, these are not really transactional relationships. These are, we all want to see each other grow.
So the journey is about building and extending relationships and then creating organizations. And many of these entrepreneurs dream, they expect that they're going to have an exit someday. I'm curious, are they seeking advice? Are they giving advice? What have you heard from your entrepreneurial community that might be nuggets of wisdom for our listeners?
Yeah, I've had a few. One of them was on one of our online sessions where people have said they should have exited sooner. These are people who are running very successful businesses. And I think the reason they probably didn't actually goes to the title of my new book. The title of the book is The Heart of the American Dream. And the reason I called it that is because of the love and the passion that is required to be an entrepreneur. But when they get to a point of success, they're still so wedded to what ultimately drove them to start the company. They can't imagine giving it up. It's like giving up one of your children, right? And so it's difficult to do, but I've talked to so many entrepreneurs where they're like, man, that one time I thought about exiting and I didn't, and I should have.
I find myself to be a committed optimist, and my friends and parallel entrepreneur companions, they are, at least in my experience, as you mentioned, wedded to this thing, and they either think it's worth more than it really is, or they're waiting for 2 more years to get it worth what they think it could be worth. I really find a serious dose of pragmatism is important, and good advisors that can help you see how the market is valuing a company, whether you're a tuck in right now or a platform or somebody that's going to go public, all these different methods of generating wealth for the founder. And they just don't ever pull the trigger. They're so involved in that identity of this business has my last name. In my own experience, we spend a lot of time talking about what's your life going to be looking like after you exit, and trying to imagine what success looks like in both operating and continuing to control this enterprise and husband it to some form of a greater level of success, or when it's time to hand it off to someone else and go to the bank and say thanks. Uh, I hear people thinking about holding on for more money or holding on for more something. How much is enough?
Yeah, for sure. You know what? I think there's also something else. I think that's identity too. I think they're a little scared to lose that part of their identity. They are the CEO of X, right? That they can't imagine themselves out of.
I like to look at a company as if it were your first child. You learn a lot with that first child. And then, a couple of years later comes along your second. And if you're blessed, maybe you have a third. You go from playing 2-on-1 to playing one-on-one man defense. And then you go to playing zone, and pretty quick you get to the fourth child and you're like, all right, I surrender. Don't kill each other. And all these learning experiences, I think you become a better parent. Let's say, for example, those are 4 companies that you've started over that 10-year period, and they're all maturing at different times and have different requirements. And when you don't lose contact or lose the love for the first child when he or she goes off to college, but you do have to let go. I'm excited about the idea of saying, look, I love all 4 of my children, and I love them each and find them each where they are, and then I give them the resources they need and watch them make mistakes and grow, and then celebrate when it's time for them to move on to the next stage. And I think if an entrepreneur were to sort of adopt that idea about their company, as opposed to this is something I'm holding on to for dear life and it's all about me, I wonder if that can't be a healthy conversation.
I think one of the things I've also found in a recent conversation with one entrepreneur who actually did exit the company, one concern that many have is what's going to happen, not just to the actual company. I mean, they're going to get their pay, they're going to walk away, but to the people that they left behind that are also still working there. And then, you come to some agreements, maybe with the person or entity taking over your company that's buying it from you, but you don't know for sure. And also, there's just a lot of pain in those moments of knowing they're going to let certain people go that you've been close to over the years because they have some other vision of how they're going to do something with that company. So I think there's a lot of pain points, but those are good ways to look at it, Mark. I think you're right. You've got to at some point be able to let go and let that take its course. And then also, what could you be doing next, right? Like
you could be starting a podcast while your kids are off in college.
Yeah, exactly.
Sharing knowledge. I just feel that like there's so much fear in these decisions, in these discussions at the employee level. The entrepreneur has a certain trepidation with knowing that that's a responsibility for them, and that post merger or acquisition integration experiences can be really challenging because it's often not thought through. You do have to address fear. People just operate, I think, from a position of fear. Speaking for myself, I know that there's been decisions that I've made that I had the fear factor was just weighed in too heavily. And I know that's one of the things I love about your community, the fearless journeys. There's a nugget in there about unlocking potential, unleashing potential everywhere by eliminating fear. Talk about that.
I think that's one of the biggest things that people have. You hit it on the head. I mean, and we really named it that because we wanted to embolden people on their own journey. You've got to be willing to take risks. And one of the questions I've asked myself many times here is I just said, what's my obstacle? 1, 2, what's the worst that can happen if I do this and it fails? And usually the worst thing that can happen is not that bad. When we start to understand fear and what it is and why it's there. It's there because we human beings have evolved from hundreds of thousands of years of history where 95, maybe 98% of the human experience was in survivor mode every day. We literally had to go out and hunt and kill what we wanted to eat, maybe defend ourselves from other people or other animals, from the weather elements. So it's ingrained in us. And the fear was put there to help us to survive. So therefore, we then now transition the concept of fear to things that really are not going to kill us. We're just afraid because it makes us uncomfortable to do something new, something that's not in our routines or in our habits. It's going to be disruptive, whatever you're going to do. So we have fear about disruption because we want to be, in control.
I set a goal for myself at the beginning of 2024 that I would respect and appreciate the defenses, my wisdom, my little voice, my inner Mark Cleveland, my higher self. I wouldn't betray myself. I wouldn't live out of fear. And this, I think, is a conversation we have to have with ourselves all the time, not just in any one point in time. But I remember this point in time early this year when I decided I would fear less. I'm just going to fear less. I'm just going to go act and do the things that my heart is asking me to invest my passion in. And doing a podcast is one of those things.
So first of all, I want to comment on two things. I think that's the best way to look at the word fearless. It's fearless. Fear is not going to go away. We're going to have fear. It's a natural instinct. We're going to have it. It's just how do we react to it? How do we work with it? Amy Gearhart did an online session about making fear your friend. And what I actually just told you, I kind of stole from Amy a little bit, because that's what she was talking about. But what she added to that was usually the thing you fear is the thing you need to do, because there's some reason why that feeling is there, because it's actually something that's telling you what you need to do. And you need to understand how to, like you said, fear less and kind of lean into that thing. The other thing I wanted to say is about the podcast. At least 5 or 6 years ago, I literally got rid of cable. I was just tired of the news. I just felt like there was so much noise in the world, and there's also so much negativity. But I will say I started listening to more podcasts, and I have a few that I'm religiously listen to every day or every week that I've been listening to for years because they give me enough of my information, and it's it's more positive. I think everything is about what you're adding to your diet, your intellectual diet. That's how you're going to see the world. If you're following things on social media or on the news that have a lot of negative vibes, guess what? You're going to have a lot of negative vibes. So I'm not saying you have to live in fantasy land, but you do need to have some sense of reality. But I think that you need to, really kind of understand what you put in is going to be what comes out.
And time is one of the undeniable, most limited resources we have. So I appreciate books that I read and podcasts that I consume and entertainment. And the news, as you just mentioned, I've really sort of diminished the amount of attention I pay to the programming that is headed my way that does not add to my goals and objectives to be a better human. And it's pretty easy. You just tune out and instead tune in to wisdom. And I'm curious, do you have, in your own experience, Francisco, do you have a spiritual or a mindfulness practice, and how does it help you?
Well, I'm a person of Catholic faith. I go to mass every Sunday. Been doing that for years, and maybe some weeks more if I get a chance. And I think just personal prayer as well. So I think that is the thing that grounds me the most is my faith. It also makes me more optimistic, I think, because no matter what's happening in the world or things around me, I think when you're a person of faith, you're going to believe that there's a bigger story, there's a guidance that you can turn to, that you don't have to have so much worry. I mean, I think, Jesus said in the gospel somewhere to his disciples who were worried all the time about everything. By the way, they're walking with somebody who they thought was the Son of God, and they're still worried and anxious and have all these concerns just like everybody else. And he said, why are you worrying so much? The Father feeds the birds. You don't think he's going to take care of you? And so I think when you live with that kind of mindset, you just kind of relax, things will take care of themselves. And then I do think, Mark, I think people, again, we are also so disconnected from nature these days, right? And so we do need to get outside more. I begin every day after I get up, I eat breakfast, and I take a 30 or 40-minute walk in the morning. I think getting in touch with nature is one of the things that will really keep us alive as humans and also grounded as well.
So you do these book reviews as a part of the Fearless Journey community. I have benefited greatly from that. Let's talk about the best two books that you reviewed and that you've consumed and shared recently.
If I had to boil it down, it's probably this one, The Alchemist. It's, I think, been published in 80 different languages. Paulo Coelho is the author, and he's a Brazilian author, and it's like 30, 35 years old now, and his book is the most translated by any living author. I've read it at least 5 times now. Little did I know, I think it planted some seeds in my head, because 2 years later I started Fearless Journeys, and when I went back about a year later, I said, I want to use that book for the first book in the book club, and when I reread it, I said, oh my gosh, this is like me. This is like Fearless Journeys, because the whole thing was Santiago, the boy in the story. He's on a physical journey, but he's on an actual mental journey as well, spiritual journey, and trying to find his treasure. And at the end of the day, I don't really want to give the book away, but I would just say, like, the biggest lesson is that the journey is what is oftentimes what it's about. It's not even just about like where we're going. It's about what we're learning along the journey, and all the different people that come in and out of our life that are part of forming us and part of helping us on that journey. But there's a refrain in that book that goes something like this: when you really want something, all the universe will conspire to help you. And when I was on my journey starting Fearless Journeys, there could not have been a bigger mantra that like came true like 1,000 times. That's the one thing I try to get across with Fearless Journeys, is helping people build the mindset, because if you really put your mind to it, anything, I mean, it sounds so trite, anything is possible, but when you really, I think when you know, if you do any kind of spiritual meditation, anything like that, and you focus and you visualize, like any kind of visualization techniques, I mean, that will be part of that universe coming along to help you. So The Alchemist, I think, is an incredible book on so many levels. It's hard to say the next one, but the next one that I'd say I've read the most is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I've used it in some of my classes down in Guatemala to students on entrepreneurship and innovation, and it's just the process of building and or breaking a habit. It is truly a process. You're not going to become something different overnight. But I think it comes back to something I said earlier too. James Clear says if you want to build these habits, you first have to identify with the person you want to be. So if you're not yet a writer, or you're not yet a runner, or you're not, right, how can you do something small on a daily basis? And maybe it's just writing 1 page of a journal every day, and then you are now a writer if you do that enough days in a row. And that 1 page might become 5 pages or 10 pages, and now you have a book. He teaches you so well how to just craft your own identity, and then the habits will follow.
You know, I've seen this question asked a million times: which is more important, the journey or the destination?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is the company.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your experience with the companionship and how you've observed that in your community of entrepreneurs.
Well, what I often like to say is the mantra, no one journeys alone. Like, people, be courageous, go on that journey, go forward with what you're doing, but understand that no one, I mean, literally no one that I've ever met that's successful has ever done anything on their own. Whatever it is, there's 100 different ways that people are helped. So you should look around and who can help you, and who can you be helping? Everybody should have mentors. Not only are they going to give you advice, they're going to probably connect you to other people, and they're going to give you some wisdom, but also there are other people you could be helping with in different ways. And so, everybody's at a different station of their life at different times, but at each point, you kind of got to look, who could help me? Who could I help? And by the way, when you help other people, let me tell you, that's going to come back. I don't do this because I think it's going to come back, but I don't know how many times it has. Sometimes you could actually see this connection very directly come back. But really, more than anything, I think you see this person with some real talent, with some, whatever it is that they have to offer, and you want to help them, bloom. It's a two-way relationship, and the mentor-mentee, I think everybody kind of helps each other.
So if you could talk to your younger self, what's the first thing that you would say?
Every high school person I meet, I usually tell them, Mark, don't go right to college. At least take a gap year. So many people are in a rush to do the thing they think they're going to do, and they should probably get a little bit more experience in the world. Maybe that means just working a job and saving some money. Maybe it means going and trying to do something entrepreneurial when you're 18, 19. Maybe it means traveling the world a little bit. I would actually also say go to a place like Guatemala and learn another language. Spend 3 to 6 months away. Learning a second language, and by the way, a third, fourth, even better, is going to give you such a heads up in the business world. By going to another country or just traveling a little bit, you will learn a lot more about yourself and about the world. Those are the things I would tell myself. Don't go right to college. Travel more. Travel with a purpose. By the way, Mark, I know your story. You didn't finish college because you were doing something entrepreneurial. And so I think you ended up going back, I think, and getting a degree later.
My experience as a college student was, I thought I was going to go get a red tie and a blue suit and join IBM. This is in the Pacific Northwest. I was going to the University of Oregon and I started my own company just to try to pay my way through college. And it exploded in the best way. And I just never looked back. And I kept on doing that, started a software company. And your comment about service really anchors me. I decided to go back to finish what I started and transferred my credits to Lipscomb University. It was a faith-based university. And I had this terrific experience of academically studying the Old Testament, academically looking at faith through a history or through a leadership lens. And I had a great time collaborating with the students and learning in that environment. And I think it anchors me in two things, like you said, service and lifelong learning.
That is key. We have to be lifelong learners. Your education doesn't end when you get that degree. This is why business people go to conferences too, right? This is why people are joining mastermind communities or fearless journeys, right? I mean, it's just constantly learning from other people.
Yeah, and you can be on the other side of the world for less than $1,000. You can, just the opportunity the idea that we can jump in an airplane and go somewhere and be in a completely different culture. I learned so much when I was interfacing with Chinese manufacturers and Taiwanese manufacturers and different businesses and European manufacturers and traveling and meeting the different business cultural influences that teach me how I can interact with people that are not like me and benefit from diversity of perspective and even learn how to approach relationships in a way that another culture does. There's a lot of value there.
You learn from a diversity of perspectives. So that way you're learning how to interact with all different kinds of people in different cultures, maybe different languages. Like you got to find out where to eat, for the first time, how to eat it. Maybe you don't want to drink the water because it's not clean. How do I get clean water? Like you every little
problem
part.
Solving. You're problem solving at scale.
Problem solving all day long during your travel experiences.
What are some of the most important skills or traits that you think a parallel entrepreneur should develop?
Well, especially for parallel entrepreneurs, I don't think this is going to be a shocking answer. I think time management, more than anything else, blocking time. I try not to do any calls in the morning because one call distracts me and then I never get anything done. So I try to keep all my calls to the afternoon. By the way, the afternoon is, your energy's down. At the beginning of the day, you can do a lot more focus. Phone calls are great because they bring up your energy. You're talking to people, but in the morning, they can send you down lots of rabbit holes, right? And it's good to build those habits, like James Clear says, but it's good to do something adventurous every week. Maybe it's going out with your friends one night. Maybe it's taking a hike on the weekend. Like just do something different to make that week a little bit more special so you're not totally caught in your routine.
So what's your North Star, Francisco? Give me 3 words that define who you are and how does that relate to your North Star?
3 words that define who I am. I would say, I'm curious, I'm adventurous, and I'm faithful, consistent. And yeah, my North Star is Jesus, but I think serving others, I think that's the idea that probably grounds everything. By the way, that's the first characteristic I outline in my new book, The Heart of the American Dream, is that's the first characteristic of entrepreneurs, first characteristic of their heart. One thing I've seen from entrepreneurs is how committed they are to serving others. It's not that they just want to make a buck. They're bringing something to the world that they believe in so much that they want to help other people. And in return, people will pay them for it, right? So for me, in serving others, it's more about connecting them with other innovators in different parts of the world, and really just helping them connect the dots in their own life as well.
I think that my life is a constant thrill-seeking, learning adventure. And by nature, I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone all the time. And it becomes something that doesn't cause me to be fearful. And
Mm-hmm.
it becomes something that I can learn hacks and habits, the atomic habits that come with being adventurous. I would just want to encourage everybody who's thinking about starting a business, anybody who has a business and is an entrepreneur and wants to press it to the next level. Find the joy in that. Find the excitement. Get yourself out of your comfort zone. Do something that scares you every day. And while you're doing that, you are adventurous. This is an
That's right.
exciting life we lead, right?
By the way, Mark, adventurous is also one of the principles I outlined in the second book, of the 10 that I identified, because that's what I looked at. The entrepreneur has an adventurous heart. Starting a business, let me tell you, is adventurous, right? But getting yourself out of your comfort zone is an adventure. Try to inspire your curiosity and try to really take on more adventures every day that you can.
How can that not inspire your team? And then you gotta accept the fact they're going to make mistakes along the way and deconstruct those mistakes and figure out what the little victory is and what you've learned, and go do it again. I mean, how many times have you tried something that didn't work, but then you tried something later and it worked the second time you did it?
Yeah. No, and sometimes the
Or
third,
third.
fourth, fifth, right? I mean, the famous phrase by Thomas Edison, right? He said something like, somebody said, "We've tried this, sir, 6,000 times." And he said, "No, we just figured out 6,000 ways it doesn't work. Like, let's try something else." And I think that's the true entrepreneur mindset, is saying, in the failure, we learned something. We learned how not to do something, or we're going to learn how to do something better next time. And that's what you do. You apply it and you iterate and you try to do it again. And look, sometimes you could run out of money or you could run out of time. Like, you can't keep doing the same things forever. But I think look at everything not as a failure, but as a learning experience and as an adventure.
That sounds like the way to do it. Well, we've talked a lot about the way it's done, the way it gets done easier, the way you have more fun doing it. And entrepreneurs are, I think, not always having fun. I think there's a stage in your business where you're searching for, hey, what's fun about this? Where's the joy? Because it's not easy. And at the same time, you hear people say, if I find something I love to do and I find joy in it, then I never work a day in my life. And I
Absolutely.
find joy in building organizations. I find joy in advising, being a travel guide in the M&A experience, or helping somebody start a company, because I've done it a number of times. And I also find joy in doing wildly different things. I find synergies from bicycle manufacturing to sock manufacturing to information services with transportation and logistics to starting a maritime company. They all made sense to me at the time. At the same time, I learned something in one industry that I could apply to another. Not just immediately adjacent lessons, but basic paradigm shifts that were only available to me because I went out and learned an entire new industry and didn't
Yeah.
spend a career in any one thing. What is the thing that most entrepreneurs are trying today to do a little bit more of or a little bit less of?
I think they're trying to delegate a lot more, and including to AI. I think you're seeing so much attention right now on so much conversation is about, what can AI do for me? How can it 10x me, 100x me, whatever? Delegating to either other employees, other maybe contractors, or actually AI, and it's all about making your business more efficient, more effective. And so that's the number one conversation I see people having right now. Also, hiring talent in other places where the labor is less as well. And that gives those people opportunities to have jobs as well. But the biggest thing is, because if you're concerned about your business and what it's trying to do for people, you're trying to figure out how you can get the most out of your resources to make your business more successful, reach more people, build more customers.
Francisco, what's the question that I should be asking you and I have not?
I'm stumped, Mark. What should you be asking me that you have not asked me? Well, let me just put it this way. We talk a lot about entrepreneurs, even now, parallel entrepreneurs. And so you're talking about people who have done something that very few people are doing, starting a business. And then the parallel entrepreneur is doing something that even fewer people are doing, not only starting multiple businesses, but running sometimes multiple businesses at the same time. This is the definition of insanity, right? like doing all these things.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. And so a lot of times when I'm talking to people, and even when I was starting Fearless Journeys, the original approach was a community for aspiring and ascending entrepreneurs. I would say that that's not for most people, but what everybody can do is build an entrepreneur mindset. And an entrepreneur mindset, that's why I outline in these 2 books, these 10 principles of the mind and 10 principles of the heart. Because if you could model that in whatever you're doing now, you will be a more valuable person, a more valuable asset to your company if you can model these characteristics of the entrepreneur. And maybe one day that will prepare you and that you'll actually be an entrepreneur in the sense of starting and running a business. They are sort of the superheroes in our society if they're able to succeed. And they bring us so many they change our lives. I mean, if we look at the super entrepreneurs, the ones that are on another level, like the Steve Jobs and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musk, I mean, just look at how those people change the world. Thomas Edison, I mentioned before. You're only going to work this hard if your heart is into it, and this long and with this much passion. And so even if you don't ever start a business, you could model these characteristics, make yourself more successful, more capable, more mentally strong. That's going to carry you through any challenge you have in life, whether it's in your life, your career, your marriage, like whatever it is. If you have these kind of characteristics, they're going to make you a better person.
Well, Francisco, it's a pleasure to have you on my journey. Thank you for being my companion, and I love you.
I love you too, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of The Parallel Entrepreneur. And thank you to our sponsors, partners, and the special team behind the scenes that make it all possible. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to our podcast and get the latest updates. And to learn more about this growing community of entrepreneurs, our mastermind and companion program for your parallel entrepreneur journey, visit parallelentrepreneur.com. And of course, thank you to all the visionary guests who trust us to share their stories.